Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to talk about line. So this whole section is about the different elements that make up a sketch and what you need to know in order to create a good one. So first one, obviously, is going to be line. When we're sketching, we're not painting with values like we would if we were actually creating a full-fledged painting, right? Normally, if we're painting, we use different values to make up and indicate where the top and bottom and side of different things are based just off of their value, okay? But when we're sketching, that's not what we do. We use mostly line, okay? Now in real life, if we look at a photo of something, there's not really any lines in real life, right? There's just edges, but there's not a hard black outline around everything we see in real life. If you look at your hand, there's no actual lines on it, right? It's not like we see this all along the outside of our hand when we look at it. No, it's just there, right? And of course things have an edge, but that's not the same as a line. Sketching is made up completely of line, so understanding how to use it and what it is, things like that are going to be really helpful. Now I had an art teacher one time that said, a line is just a dot that went for a walk. Okay, and that's pretty much what it is, right? It's putting your pencil down on your surface and then just dragging it. That's a line, okay? Now, there's different ways that we can use line to indicate an idea. It's pretty amazing considering that in real life we don't actually see lines, that when our brain sees an image composed of different lines that we can look at it, and even though there's no value involved and just line, we can look at it, and without seeing a real photograph, our brain can recognize what something is, even though there's no actual photo, right? Just like in real life, there's no lines. Well, in a drawing, there is lines. We could still tell what it is, right? That's an eye. Okay, so we need to learn how to use that to our advantage, okay? We'll come back and talk more about that. Keep that in mind. So this is a sketch I did of this goat creature man. Okay, so there's some different elements of line that we want to talk about, okay? The first one is line weight, okay? And we're going to do some examples on this to show you what I mean by line weight. Line weight is how thick or thin a line is. So if something has a heavy line weight, it's going to look like this. If it has a thin line weight, it'll look like this, okay? And depending on which one you use is going to send a different message, right? Heavy line weight can be used to really help signify and show the outline of something or set something back in space. So if I used a heavy line weight all along his head, it would help us know that this was in the foreground of the image, right? This was in front of everything else, okay? Really helps pull it forward, okay? Also, line weight can be used to help indicate shadow. So in this, there's no values, right? There's no highlights, there's no shadows or anything like that, but the heavier line weight we use, the more that it indicates there's a shadow. So for example, you could see up here on his left eye, that brow ridge has a lot heavier line weight than some of the other parts of the image, like say the top of his horns up here, right? Same with his other eye. That top brow ridge is pretty dark because I'm trying to indicate that his eye is set back in his head a little bit, right? Same with underneath his cheekbone. The line weight is a lot heavier because I want to signify that this is a drop off, right? Like an edge, okay? So let's do another example. Let's show up here on his horn, on his right horn. I'm going to add a little bit of line weight underneath this edge here so that our brain knows that that kind of twists there. And we'll do the same thing on the other side, right? So wherever there'd be more likely to be a little bit more shadow, that's where you can put a heavier line weight and signify that it's a little darker under there. We can do the same thing over here on his face. I've kind of done that already with his mouth a little bit, right? These horns here, okay? So same thing. Additionally, you can have line fade out, right? Especially in parts where it gets really light. So you can see here on his head, the line gets really thin and really light because that's where most of the light's going to be hitting. If it was really dark up here, it wouldn't really have any direction of light, but because it's light up there, the line's really thin and it's darker on the bottom, it kind of makes it feel like it's lit, even though we haven't used any value, right? So really focus on you don't have to put a ton of focus on it, but be conscious of it, right? Be aware, what is your line weight like? Don't just draw the same line thickness all the way around unless that's the look you're going for, like maybe you're drawing a coloring book. But when we're sketching, we're going to want to use line weight because that's going to help us convey form and different things like that, okay? So really important, line weight. Next thing is straight versus curved lines, right? You don't want to just use all curvy lines everywhere all the time. You don't just only want to use straight lines, but you kind of want to get a balance of them, right? So on the outside edge right here, for example, of his horn, straight line on both sides, right? In the middle, straight line for the most part, right? This edge is pretty straight, okay? contrasted, however, with the curves on the inside. Same with these horns. It's really curved, right? That contrast is really pleasing to the eye, and you want to try and do that consciously when you're drawing stuff, right? So when you're doing sketches, you want one side to be relatively straight while the other side to be curved some sort, right? It creates a really nice dynamic that looks really appealing, okay? Between those two concepts, that's most of what you're going to need to know when it comes to line. Just keep in mind that not everything needs an outline, right? Sometimes stuff can just fall off and disappear. For example, in his eye socket here, we know that this texture right here on his head, this stuff, all this, is supposed to be kind of like a hard, bony surface, right? While inside of here in his eye, it's fleshy. Now, we know that somewhere along here, there's going to be a transition between bone and flesh, but there's not going to be a hard ledge like there is up here on the top of his eye. So that doesn't mean I need to draw a line to outline everything like that and make him look like he's wearing a mask or some sort of raccoon, right? The line just fades, right? This bony ridge, it just comes down, and then when it gets to here, it just fades away, which is totally okay, right? You don't need a line for everything. Some things can just be invisible, right? They're implied. So even though we don't see it, it's implied that the line continues here, right? That there's a transition there, okay? So keep that in mind, and you can do that on a lot of areas, especially areas that are in really bright light. You know, sometimes, for example, if we want to draw a ball, okay, so we have a ball over here, and I only want to use line to convey it, then I would put the heavy line over here on this side, right, and then I would have it come up here and almost completely fade away to nothing right there. Right? And then I would draw the shadow in. And this line weight with that spot fading away at the top of the ball helps us kind of get an idea of the shadows, even though we didn't really use values. We kind of hatched in a shadow down here, but even without that, there's not any hatching on the ball, right, to let us know where the shadows lie. But because we let that line weight fade away to nothingness, right, it's not like without this being connected, right? If we connected this all the way, you could tell it's a ball. But if we take it away, it's not like we're like, what is that? Is that just a big floating sea? No, you could still tell, obviously, it's a circle, right? We can look at it and imagine that it continues and finishes a circle. So you don't always need to finish the outline. Sometimes it's better to just let it be an implied or suggested line, okay? So that's it for line, and I'll see you guys in the next lecture.